My guest today is writer-director Dylan Trupiano, and his work has been screened at festivals including the Oscar-qualifying HollyShorts Film Festival, even Flicker's Rhode Island, as well as New Next Film Festival. Now, he was one of the 50 directors from around the world selected for the Playlab Films Creators Lab in 2022, but today we're here to talk about his brand new short film, Recesses, which is currently making its way through the festival circuit after winning the Panavision New Filmmaker Grant. Now, partly inspired by the director's own experience from childhood and shot at his former elementary school, the short just screened at the Oscar qualifying HollyShorts Film Festival. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome filmmaker Dylan Trupiano and his short film Recesses to the show. Welcome, Dylan.
Hey, how's it going?
Doing great. Well, I have to say, wow, what an incredible short film you created called Recesses. I understand that it's partly based on your own story. So, why was it important for you to make this film?
Yeah, so the film kind of came as a sort of, I think, a an ode to kind of my childhood as well as, was born as being kind of a memory piece to that period of my life. I shot it in my own elementary school, like you said, in suburban Michigan. And it was basically, it came to me in a couple of different ways. One, my dad is a public school teacher and he teaches third grade. He actually taught at the school that we filmed at. And, being his son, like who also attended that school, I would often stay there late into the night and kind of wait for him to finish his work. And so I was very familiar with the ways that public school teachers, sacrifice a lot of their time and give so much of themselves to their work. In a way that I think the public is aware of, but I don't think, especially in the United States, we completely appreciate. And so I wanted to, tell a story about public educators and the way that they uh, give so much to their students, as well as tell a story about, the Midwest and the kind of, repressive culture that exists within it. People are very, very polite, but there's a lot bubbling underneath the surface. That I think people have a difficult time sort of talking about, and people also have a difficult time confronting each other sometimes. And I tied that in with this incident from my childhood in which, at an early age, this thing happened to me that I kind of couldn't quite put language to yet, as well as understand really what it was that happened to me. And, as a result, for many years, it took a long time for me to sort of be able to process it. So it kind of came out of, wanting to make a film about those three different things. And that's what we did.
Well, did making of this film become therapeutic for you?
I think it definitely did. I mean, it really kind of recontextualized, I think, a lot of that period of my life because I had to kind of view it through sort of an adult lens. Like I knew what it felt like as a child, and that's a lot of the film is kind of seen through the main character's eyes, who is a child. And so on one hand, it was, a therapeutic experience being able to kind of like I guess kind of bring to life a lot of those feelings and memories and that experience and try to kind of render it into the medium of film. Um, and then, outside of that, like I said, having these other adult characters who are like analyzing the situation and kind of dealing with the situation, I think it gave me a different perspective on it because, like I said, I only had my own perspective at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, because this film starts out with the principal looking at an inappropriate drawing from the one of the main characters, the student Bailey, and you really kind of show two different things on how an educator views something like this. The principal didn't think too much of it, didn't dig deep for it, but the secretary felt that there was a much deeper problem. And and I like the fact that you put the location within the Midwest because, like you said, doesn't matter what part of the country you're in, uh, people will always have some type of issue or trauma that may happen in their childhood. But the Midwest kind of shows the point that everybody's polite, but everybody's not going to be talking about, the what ifs. Maybe because it's guilt, maybe it's because it's shame.
Yeah, completely. It's, you know, I think people in the Midwest are, you know, they're very kind, and I love the Midwest. Like, it's not at all. I didn't want to make this film as some sort of critique of people in the Midwest and like the way that they like, like can't confront their own emotions, but rather sort of show, I think, kind of the reality of when, you have an ultra polite society. Very often it becomes hard for people to sort of, talk about difficult things because they don't want to ruffle any feathers, you know?
Or they don't want the
They,
label. They don't want to be wearing the label because it does, depending on what it is, that person is going to feel that they're wearing a scarlet letter.
right, right. Like they don't want to be perceived as, a victim or something like that. And, there's a lot of, yeah, despite the politeness that exists, like people in the Midwest have a lot of pride, and I think that exists everywhere in the country. People all over America and the world, frankly, have different sort of ways of repressing their emotions and stuff like that. But I wanted to sort of convey what it like the specificities of it in the Midwest,
Yeah, you
where like
you give us a mystery, and you created a film that allows the audience themselves are going to be filling in the blanks. Because
right,
like, when a young child experiences trauma, it could be sexual trauma, it could be severe bullying, but they can carry that into adulthood. And many, like you said, they never confront what happens to them, which then can create repression, depression, or a series of bad relationships or a lack of relationships, both social and intimate. But there's really not a clear-cut answer here, is there?
I mean, I think there's like a general answer as to what happened, to this main character. It's not something that I thought was necessary to show the specifics of, because frankly, a lot of films that deal with, some sort of assault, like I think can be very heavy-handed as well as, can also just like as somebody who's experienced it, like it can sort of, you can accidentally render it as cinematic, and that's not, I think, helpful to, the story as well as to like viewers. I think for many viewers, it's like a really difficult thing to like watch, and especially when there's, a child involved. And, you know, I think for me, like, since it's based off of my experience, I, you know, a lot of the film is about this main character who something has happened to him. He knows there's something wrong, but he can't quite put language to it. And I think that is a very universal experience, even into adulthood, of what assault can feel like. And I think, frankly, a lot of people who go through it can't quite recount what it is that happened to them. And that's what makes it difficult to sort of reach out to people for,
Well,
and especially when you're a child, you have like even less language as an adult to
well,
do that.
yeah, because even on the and really on the child side, many children are led to believe that it was their fault. And then
Right.
yeah, so then they don't know how to they don't know how to process it, they don't know how to talk about it. Uh, but you kind of give us I don't know if I want to call it. I don't know if I want to call one of the characters a villain, but Toby, the kid with the red boots, he's a bit of a mystery. Um, is he the cause of Bailey's trauma?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I wanted to convey that, through just you see it in the drawing. You see he's in the drawing, kind of you don't see him do something necessarily, but you hear in the flashbacks like Bailey asking Toby to stop. Toby's chasing after him in the woods when Toby's mom and Toby see Bailey like at the end of the school day and are talking to him like, you know, Toby's mom notes that there's something kind of weird going on, and Bailey kind of can't even look at him. I again, it was I think also just because this is something that like it's another child doing something to another child. I was very apprehensive of showing one showing what it
Oh no,
was
no,
as
no!
well as
Because
just
see,
showing who. Mhm.
see, this is the part of filmmaking that you just did that I wish more people would do. And I do see it, but then there's those I just literally just don't get anymore. I look back, it's kind of like filming a movie in the 1940s or 1950s. You can imply something without ever showing the audience. The audience goes, they know what happens. It's kind of like, it's like if you're watching a film with, let's say it was Spencer Tracy and maybe Marlene Dietrich out of the clear blue, and there's a scene, and then he closes the door. We know what's going to happen, but you don't have to show anything. But it also that technique works in the sense of a mystery, and you bring that because when I saw Toby and his mother talking to Bailey, she didn't have a clue. She was just being nice and kind. Bailey, you could tell by the look on his face, something was not right. And then you take that camera shot of the red boots, and then that's when really the ball starts to roll here. So we know that there's something wrong. But you bring so many elements out here because when you had Bailey say, "Oh, well," when the secretary asked him if he was okay, and he goes, "Well, my stomach hurts." When I heard that line, that's usually a made-up excuse by a
Right.
child to maybe say either "leave me alone" or "I want to be alone." Um, I, Basically, it's almost their way of, I guess, hiding in some type of protective mode. Would that be correct?
I mean, I think that's definitely true. Um, I that that moment in particular came out of like it came out of a real detail from my childhood where when I was younger, I would like kind of after this incident happened, I got just a lot of stomach aches that were like a direct result of anxiety, you know, and stuff. And funny enough, I these kind of stomach aches that I would get often happen when I was at school and I would go into the nurse's room and lie down in that same room that we filmed in, on that same bed that we filmed in. And so it was this very weird, that was kind of, I think, the most surreal sort of moment when filming of just kind of like being behind the camera. Here's this child that doesn't, I guess, look very far from how I did when I was that age. And he's, saying that, you know, his stomach hurts. And that's really it, you know? And, to your point as well, I think like many kids also do that, and I think I also did that too when I like wanted to be alone and when I was just feeling isolated generally, and didn't really wanted to be away from people, but really didn't know how to do it other than just lie and say, you know, yeah, my
Yeah.
stomach hurts, so
You,
therefore you have to leave me alone.
yeah. I mean, all the elements of this film are so authentic as to what is, well, still happening today. And since your father was also a school teacher. Sherry, the secretary, knew something was wrong, and she took the initiative to try to get Bailey to open up. And maybe you've had these discussions with your father. It's a difficult decision for a school administrator to open up a line of communication with a student when they feel that something is wrong, isn't it?
Oh, completely. I mean, I think all teachers in some way or another, you know, have like have done a version of opening up to like a student when they know that there is something, wrong and going on. And yeah, it's difficult because there is this kind of line that you have to balance as a teacher where you're in this, like, this is your job, you're in a professional environment, and like as part of your profession it's to like, help your students succeed. But especially when, you know you're growing up, whether you're in elementary school, middle school, or high school, like in order to succeed, like you need some sort of stability, and not all kids have that. Some kids like go home and like their parents maybe aren't making them dinner, or something else is going on in their life that makes it very difficult for them to succeed as a student. And so like I mean, it's part of the thing that I think people are aware of, these kinds of responsibilities that teachers take on when, you know, running a classroom. But there are so many difficult and convoluted and complicated situations that, people just don't think about. When they think of teachers, they're like, yeah, like, they run a classroom and they get the summers off, and like they don't get paid very much, and that's, a bummer. But like all said and done, like it'd be nice to have the summer off. And and a lot of these stories within the film and like little tidbits do come from, my, like, not only my dad's experience, but experiences of other teachers. Like I have other public teachers in my family who've all dealt with versions of this, whether it be like, condescension from a peer, uh, being talked down to by a parent, or being like kind of confronted by a parent in an aggressive manner. Um, there are endless stories that public educators have, because they're they're not just teaching, they're people managing. And they're very small people,
Well,
you know?
with teachers who have been in the profession for a very, very long time, they see the signs. And a lot of times they're not going to say anything. Um, some teachers may teach, but they're not the type that confronts. There are those that feel that they need to confront. And of course, parents, that's a whole different story on what their reactions could be, because for some parents, they think the teacher's crossing the line.
Right. Yeah, completely. I think a lot of parents, you know, they might feel that the teacher is crossing the line and assuming something. Some parents might feel as though they're being accused of something, whether
Hmm.
that's being accused of like, doing something to their child, as well as being accused of, you know, or being accused of like being a bad parent. And I think that's where a lot of this comes out of. And, in the film specifically, I think the father in the film, when he's kind of with, you know, confronted by the secretary, that's coming out of a fear that she's calling him a bad parent, or just like, is pushing him, as well as being called a bad parent, as well as being, I think he's also just
He,
afraid that there's something is wrong with his son.
yeah, I see. When the father enters the picture, because when I was watching the film, I replayed I replayed the prince at the very beginning. I replayed the principal scene over and over again. Um, course, the scene with the second Sherry, the secretary, that one guy trying to make small talk, and then Bailey there with Toby and his mother. Um, but then there's the whole sequence of scenes with the father, Bailey's father. But you give the audience a neutral feeling about him. Like I kept replaying the scene over and over again. I'm like, is he guilty of something? Or does he know what's going on? And I think the audience, I think the audience may go 50-50 as to, okay, the father, is he a bad guy or is he not a bad guy, or he just doesn't want to he doesn't want to face whatever's bothering Bailey, or he doesn't know how. Because my guess is he a single parent?
Yes.
Yeah. So I that adds extra pressure. So why
Hmm.
did you kind of go neutral with the father figure for the audience?
Because I mean, to me, it was apparent that Toby had was responsible for whatever happened to Bailey, and that you know the dad. I don't think the dad is a bad person, nor is he a bad father. I think that he is somebody who just doesn't lack the emotional tools to deal with a situation like this. And that to me is a lot more realistic of a situation than, you know, than painting him as, this guy who just completely dismisses what she's saying or, is like, you know, immediately buys what she's saying and is like, "Oh, you're so right. I'm gonna talk to him." I think a lot of parents, and this also comes again from the kind of experiences that I've, you know, heard from teachers that, you know, a lot of parents just don't want to like admit that there's something wrong with their kid. They love their kid so much. They think that they're very close to their kid, and to hear from another adult like, "Hey, I think something bad happened to your kid," like the parent would just immediately be like, "You don't know my son. What are you talking about?" Like, okay, he drew something inappropriate. Like,
Yeah.
you respectfully, where are you coming from? Just because you like work in a school doesn't mean you're some psychologist.
Right.
You know,
Yeah, but
and that to go ahead.
see the father, see, it's coming into view now. Um, the father, if you analyze his words and his actions, what he's dealing with is he may know what what has happened to Bailey. He's kind of caught in a catch 22. One, do you confront Toby's mother and create a situation where everybody's going to know? So if Bailey's going through guilt and shame, the father will go through guilt and shame. So, and I think the father is fighting to avoid that. And the thing that got me is when Bailey got when they were getting into the truck to go home. It's what the father said to him. I should say it was the way he said it. Like he goes, "Hey, you want to go get some burgers?" But it was the way he said it and the look in his eye, meaning he was harboring emotions about whatever the situation was. So he was dealing with it, but that was his way of dealing with it.
Right. exactly. You know, that scene where, he gets in, Bailey gets into the car and the dad's like sitting there waiting. We only see Bailey's dad through his eyes, which, was very much me trying to kind of set a contrast between the sort of like, jovial, like, let's want to go get some burgers, and then seeing this, his eyes are telling a very different story. He's he's clearly feeling some guilt and shame from just one, like, because what Bailey witnessed right before was like him kind of like yelling at the secretary, which I think like is a little embarrassing for him, because like he clearly has, I think, a close relationship with his son, um, as well as just this conflict of, you know, I think when people are confronted with an inconvenient truth, especially about somebody that they love, their instinct is to deny it.
Yeah.
They're like, especially if you're like, I mean, I'm not a father, but I think that a lot of parents, like, when they are told something is wrong with their kid, as, again, I've heard through stories, their initial reaction is to say no. Like, I've heard stories from teachers where, a teacher like sees a student who clearly has, like some form of autism, and the teacher tries to talk to the parent, or to the dad, and the dad immediately just says, like, like, you teachers are all the same, you're all like, psychoanalytical, like, you don't know what you're talking about. But that moment when he's in the car, I think, is sort of a, now that he got that denying out of his system and he's sitting in silence, he's trying to grapple with, is there something wrong with him? But then the second Bailey shows up, he just goes back into this performative, I'm a good dad show that,
Yeah, because see, he already knew. Then when Sherry, the secretary, wanted to discuss it with him, now he knew somebody else knew, or close to what they think they knew, but they're on to something, and he knew that. So he went into a defensive mode in that conversation with Sherry. And then when they got into the car, he's trying to find a way to put a band-aid on it.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's like, I don't honestly know if Bailey's dad knows what it is that happened to him. I don't, and like, he very well could know that, like, something went down you know with Toby that Bailey doesn't seem to want to talk about. I don't think he completely knows. Well, yeah, that, to me, that is like up to the viewer to decide if they, like, want to believe that Bailey's dad, you know
Okay.
knows something about
Oh,
it.
well, wait, back up because now I'm thinking because I remember the flashback scene of
Hmm.
Bailey running through the woods,
Yeah.
and in that scene, because Bailey was running through the woods and he was being chased by Toby, would I be correct to say that Toby was only chasing Bailey to make sure he didn't go squeal to somebody?
I think what it is that the drawing is a depiction of what happened between Toby and Bailey,
Oh,
since the
yeah.
drawing is inappropriate. And so, and like, because we're cutting between what you see in the drawing and, the woods, it's striking, kind of like, it's trying to communicate that the drawing is what you are seeing in this flashback,
Yeah.
showing the tree in the drawing and then the trees in real life, Bailey on the ground in the drawing, Bailey on the ground in real life. And, you know, I mean, because there is this inappropriate element of the drawing, that I don't show the
Right.
audience. That is like a depiction of what it is that happened to Bailey.
Okay, the other element of this whole film is you are showing that men who experience trauma, they don't usually, well, they spend most of their time keeping it buried and not really go through any type of healing process to move on from it, correct?
Completely. I mean, I think that a lot of a lot of trauma similar to what's being depicted in this film tends to happen to men when they're younger, when when it's easier to sort of, hurt them. And that's at an age when, yeah, like we've talked about, you don't necessarily have the emotional tools to understand what it is that happened to you. You don't have the language to really tell people. Um, and so as a result, like, you kind of just keep moving forward, but a lot of that pain, it just you just have to learn to kind of push it down. And
Yeah, that's why films like this, I believe, can open up conversations and possibly bring people forward for themselves to find healing. What have the audience's reactions been to the film, and what are some of the most common questions you get about it?
the I mean, the reactions have been really interesting because, I think for a lot of people, the film obviously has this sort of opaque style to it where, because I'm not like exactly like showing you what it is that happened, I'm trying to give you the math and let you answer the question. Um, and so to some extent there have been some people who obviously like want a confirmation of what they thought it was. And frankly, what's often happened is, when somebody approaches me in that way, when they're like, "Can you tell me what happened in the movie?" I'll be like, "Yeah, what do you think happened?" And then they'll explain to me what happened in the movie, and I'm like, "That's correct." And on one hand, there's a part of me that like obviously feels like, "Oh, God, did I fail as a filmmaker because they don't know
It was
entirely what it
it
is?" But
was
then,
told by the principal.
mhm.
Her line alone already tells you, you know. Of course, the rest of the film is us putting the pieces together. And so, yeah, I find that odd that people would ask you that point blank. I'm like, then they weren't paying attention.
I mean, yeah, like it's well, it's not even that I don't think that they weren't paying attention. I think because there is no definitive this is what happened, like there's no, like, you don't see what it is for your own eyes. You don't, you know,
Well,
hear, I
you
mean,
were trying to portray a difficult situation with some sort of grace and still get the point across.
completely. And even before just like thinking of, trying to tell a story about this in a way that, allows for a viewer to be thinking about kind of not the situation itself, but the reaction to the situation, because that's frankly a lot of films that are centered around trauma are more kind of built for like showing what the trauma is rather than actually giving space to discuss it. I, above all that, wanted to tell a film, tell a story rather, that I thought was accurate to the experience. And the experience is not one that completely, you know, like has like a logical beginning, middle, and end to it. It feels sort of strange, and like your memory comes in and out, and you remember these random details such as how the tree swayed, or like your foot. like when something bad happens. Like if you break a bone, I've heard stories for people where they can like describe like, you know, like the smell of the floor when they were like waiting to be picked up. You know, it like that to me is more accurate, and that's also the power of film as a medium, is like being able to sort of depict that. That's what a novel can't
You
quite do.
you created, the more and more I keep thinking about this when I'm and replaying the film in my head, you created controlled silence. And it's within the silence of Bailey, Toby, Sherry the secretary, the father, but that controlled silence is all connected. And I think for some audiences, they're so used to seeing movies on streaming that it's kind of like watching a movie trailer and it just tells you the whole movie. So there's no use in
Right,
seeing the movie.
right.
Um,
You know, all the beats, all the story beats are just completely laid out. So it's like, don't worry, you can just turn off your brain when you're actually watching the movie because we already told you kind of like
exactly,
generally what it is.
but
So yeah,
you cause the audience to think, and a lot of people are not used to that anymore. um, but no, it is. It's controlled silence within this film that is the invisible character. That's what that everybody is responding to. And when you wrote this script and then you were getting ready to cast it, how did you cast the film and what did the actors think when they read it?
it was, well, I mean, it's funny because the main, like one of the our other leads, Sherry, the secretary, who's played by Celia Cates, you know, I knew for a long time that I wanted to like tell some sort of story about this just because I hadn't seen it depicted in a film before. And, you know, it was obviously this really, you know, traumatic and powerful incident for me. I didn't really know kind of how to go about doing it. And then I imagined, but I knew that there was going to be a secretary. And it wasn't until I imagined Celia, who was a friend of mine, um, playing the role of the secretary, that literally, and this is without any hyperbole, within that night that I thought of her, I had kind of the general outline of the film in my head. Like it all very much came to me immediately. And that was something I didn't actually even tell her until the second, like right after she finished her final scene. Like she had just wrapped. I came up to her and I told her that because I was like, this just felt always correct. It felt, once I imagined you in this role, like you had to do it. Um, and her reaction to the script was, she obviously, because this film I think plays differently as a script, she had some questions just about kind of like making sure that she like understood everything, because even like the film that we have now is pretty opaque, but I think the script was even less clear. um she she needed like a little bit of a like, wait, so just want to make sure I'm following, this is what happened, right? And I was like, yes. And then the other role, the child actor played by Charles John Wilson, he was, I mean, I for a long time was like telling my producers, I was like, I don't know if we're gonna make this movie if we don't get this kid right, because what I knew he had to do was so difficult, and like I didn't know that we were gonna be able to find somebody in time who could like completely do it. We luckily had the help of our casting director, Stacy Pianco, who like scrubbed backstage for months, was sending the script out to people. And when I saw his tape, it was, you know, a lot of child actors, and I'm sure you know this, like they put a lot of sauce on, you know, their performances, because frankly a lot of the performances they are used to seeing other child actors do are very exaggerated because they're, they're for like children's shows and like children's movies and stuff like that. And there's nothing wrong with that performance out, but I knew that this had to be really, held back. And he, in watching his audition tape, clearly just had that muscle within him of being able to not overplay a line or, overdo it. He could just say it as though he he had a secret almost. Um, and so like we like I sent it the I offered the role to him, and I talked to his mom, and we had like a very long conversation just about the themes of the film and sort of what was being depicted, how it was a personal story for me. And because of the nature of the film, I was really adamant about not only earning the trust of uh you know Charles's parents, but earning his trust as well. And so I drove out to Milwaukee, which is where he lives, a month before the shoot, and we got to spend just like some time together over the weekend and just like get to know each other and just kind of like form a relationship and form a bond, so that by the time we were on set, we had already kind of established ourselves as friends, and given, and as well as people who trusted each other, you know um and in terms of talking to him about the film, like we had a conversation about it, and it was honestly a very short conversation, where as soon as I told him what it was, he just kind of nodded and said okay. And I think to some extent it's hard. I think he's about 13 now. He was 12, I believe, when we filmed it, but it's a hard thing to completely grasp at that age. But I tried, offering as much as I thought would be helpful to him, which was not, getting too into the nitty gritty of just like Bailey's experience and sort of Bailey's inner turmoil as I had seen it, but giving him a lot of room to sort of, play it sim as simply as possible, because his audition tape, like I said, already had so much of it in there. It was just about, you know, keeping it contained, I
Yeah,
guess.
that makes a whole lot of sense. And and a lot of parents may not even would have let their kids play that role.
Oh, completely. I mean, and that was part of the main reason I was so concerned too, was because on one hand it was like you got to get the right, kid, number one, but number two, because of the themes of the film, that's like it's a hard thing as I think a parent to, watch your child perform, as somebody who's experiencing that. And I don't blame any parents who wouldn't want to see that, or any, you know, children who wouldn't want to play something like that, because it is so incredibly heavy.
Oh, very, very, very heavy, very heavy. But he pulled he pulled the whole character Bailey off. I mean, perfectly, perfectly. So, he's got an incredible reel going now because he's showed a side of acting that most kid actors will never have on their demo reel.
Completely. I mean, yeah, it's part of what I realized in making the film is that, you know, when I said earlier I had never seen this sort of experience depicted, it's because it's a hard thing to ask for a child actor, like being able to sort of play that emotional landscape where there is something is wrong, but you can't quite articulate it. It's, and a lot of it has to go sort of unsaid and be in the eyes and the face and the body language. while also still capturing the truthful energy of what being a child is, such
Well,
as in the scenes
my
where
gosh, what
he
did his
runs
parent?
off.
Yeah, what did his parents think when they saw the film in its completed form?
They were, I mean, his mom, Rhiannon, I remember she texted me something like, poor Bailey. And I was like, yeah, yeah, that's a fair reaction. I mean, she was, yeah, thought it was incredibly moving, and I think it was hard for her to see, but you know, Charlie as a kid, if you know him, is incredibly goofy, and he's very, very silly. And so I think in some ways it is maybe a little easy for her to kind of like, see this like performance and be like, that's not my son. That's Bailey. That's like,
I can see that. Yeah,
yeah,
because if he's happy, if he's a silly kind of kid, loves to joke around and
he's a
laugh,
clown.
and then you see him pull off a performance like this, then it's like my kid became somebody else, you
Right,
know?
exactly.
And
Like
I mean,
he yeah,
when
he's just like when you see him on set, like he would be going from these takes where like he looks like he's holding back tears to then just like, jumping up and down and like, throwing out a Minecraft reference that nobody understands. And we'd be like, there's Charlie.
you know,
Bailey's left the scene.
well, how did you cast the father?
The father was also through we got his audition tape through Stacy, and there was something about him, about Bryant, that like Bryant is the actor who plays the dad, that we thought one felt just very authentic to, the Midwest, because he's also from the Midwest. He's from Ohio, and was able to drive to Seminole. But it was, I mean, it was this difficult thing of like, not, I wanted to lean away from casting somebody that like felt like an actor, a hired gun, somebody that like felt like, felt authentic to the environment, as well as somebody who would be able to play the father's the father's shame,
Yeah,
his
yeah.
his fear. And I thought Brian was able to really do it in his eyes, because he has these very, very striking eyes. And, he obviously can, as you see in the film, play the aggressive side of the character really well. But behind that, when I saw him, I also just saw a lot of fear there. And not fear that, like, that again, in talking about wanting to make sure that we're orienting the viewers correctly, not making them think that, oh, maybe he did something, maybe he's like partially responsible for this. Fear that there's something wrong with his son, and like a sadness that like his kid is clearly struggling with something, and he doesn't really know how to do it other than just by like trying to cheer him up all the time and be ultra sweet to him, you know
But that explains why he said when they got in the car and he said, "Hey, you want to go for burgers?" He was immediately trying to lighten the mood.
right,
You know,
right.
but it was only his way. It was only the father's way of saying, "I'm here," but he wasn't actually inviting him to open up because the father was dealing with his own type of issue. Or, if we created its own backstory, we could have said that the father may have experienced something like this as well and expects his son to bury it just like he did.
Yeah, I don't think, I don't think he is. even necessarily trying to like tell him like to just like forget about it. I just don't think he knows what to do,
That's
you know?
exactly, yeah, that's exactly it. He doesn't know what to do. But I will say, you couldn't have ended that film any better.
Yeah, yeah. The truck shot, our DP Cece Chan, she kind of she's uh very early on during the location scouting envisioned, the trucks just sitting in the parking lot. And that was one of those images that like I hadn't had that in my initial shot list, but I was like, anytime CC had an idea, I just was like, do it. Like, let's go for it. And that was one that when I was editing the film, like, and we got to that scene and I just saw, the truck sitting there, I was like, that's the end of the film. That's
I-
what,
You,
leaving it just there in
you,
this permanent kind of
you,
static space.
you took the father and son and you enclosed them. And I go back and I'm remembering that there was dew or there's water droplets, like rain droplets that were on the windshield of the truck. It's
Oh
almost
yeah,
like
ice.
it's almost was it ice? I mean,
Yes, it was ice. It was very, very quickly, if I may interrupt. It was so cold that night that we were filming it. It was 0 degrees that our production designer sprayed water on the window, and within 2 minutes, it was frozen. So
because
that's how it got there.
when I looked at it, because I'm thinking, okay, you have an enclosed space. It's the father and the son, private. The rest of the world is no longer there. And then with the moisture of the windshield, it's almost like a silent tears. And then it just
Right.
ends. I mean, literally the way you. I'm serious. I mean, when it ended, I sat there and I go, oh, and then I went, oh yeah, okay. Because what else were you going to do?
Right. I mean, yeah, it's I've seen it in a crowd a couple of times now, and there is a silence when the movie ends that like I wasn't like I obviously know that it's like it's a dark and pretty heavy ending, but I guess every time I kind of watch it there is this kind of like scattered applause afterwards. I'm just like like I mean, and it's not that again it's not that I obviously knew that the film was going to be heavy and was going to be dealing with these, dark emotions, non like throughout its runtime. Um, but it's just very fascinating to after, years of processing this incident and then years of working on the story and then writing the script, just getting to like that final scene and, having just sitting in that reaction because it feels like it took you know 28 years to get there of just kind of like dumping my guts and then you know uh having the movie end that way.
Well, I've heard this from other filmmakers with short films that you have a heavy subject, and then the way that a particular film will end, the audience sits there because they don't know if they're allowed to applaud.
I think, yeah, and I think like I don't know. I don't want to say it in some way of just like, oh, people like would be nicer to me if blah 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 blah. But I think it is one of those movies that is hard for. I think it's a little uncomfortable for people to come up and be like, I just loved that. Like,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
Dill, you killed it. I
I
think
get
they're
it.
always a little bit like, hey, how you doing, bud? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I have been told from, especially from filmmakers in the UK, and they go, you know, uh, the audiences are really different on both sides of the Atlantic. You have those that they respond in like in Europe. I don't think they hold back. I think they just applaud. Hey, this is the film. Um, you achieved putting the story together on film. Applause. You get to America, and they seem to. It's more of an emotional situation, and then with some films, they're like, "This was a really great film," but then they're almost embarrassed to applaud. Like it's almost like they're cheering on what happened badly, so they don't know how to
Right,
react. So
exactly.
I find it funny.
Exactly. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, for me, I would
It,
probably
it
sit there and applaud in the fact of for the filmmaker. I would applaud
right,
for the filmmaker.
right.
So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're on a film festival and you see a very heavy subject on screen, and then once it's over, applaud for the filmmaker. So that way you
And
don't
if you
feel
need
guilt or shame.
and if you need a second, that's okay. In some ways I've also taken it as like, a very kind thing of just like,
Yeah.
some movies the second like, the credits come up, like some people can't wait to just be like, all right, woo, we're done. Like finally that's over.
Yeah,
Whereas
so
I think
it's always funny how audiences react, and so for you, what do you hope that this film will achieve with those that have the opportunity to watch it?
I mean I to me, truthfully, the biggest thing I hope for is that, it makes people, I think, I hope that the film creates more empathy for not just children and teachers, but for people when they're struggling with something and, they don't quite know how to communicate it. I mean, that to me was always kind of like the nucleus of, the inspiration to make the film. People, I think, nowadays have a lot of difficulty talking about difficult subjects, um, and especially when, you know a situation like this that's depicted in the film, it's something that even when people watch it, they're like a little afraid of talking about it, because I don't think that is necessarily like a bad impulse, because I think people are afraid of screwing up how they talk about it. But as a result, sometimes they're so afraid of screwing up that they just don't talk about these sorts of
Yeah,
subjects. and
yeah.
s- and to me, the film was always about how, if there's anything wrong that, our main characters do, it's, they don't just say the thing. They don't just look the thing in the eye and say what it is. It's always through these kind of, little comments, or sort of like vague kind of like, you're hinting at something, but you're not saying what it directly is. In the same way that we talked about, like, a lot of the film is structured through that sort of like plotting, where like you don't see what it is that happens. It's just being hinted, and it's it's aggravating to watch, but it's also, I think, in reality, how a lot of people talk to each other, when
It's true
not
to
just it comes
life.
to this. It's Yeah, it's a lot of people have difficulty, confronting tough subjects, and I just hope that the film not only shines a light on, this sort of thing that, you know men can experience when they're younger, because I've had a lot of men who, when I was developing the film and talking to them about the plot, who admitted to me that something similar happened to them when they were younger. And I found that kind of shocking, because some people were really, really close to me already. And I was like, so you've never told me about this. You know, and not that they needed to necessarily, but, I think there are way more men who've went through something like this than we, as, a society, care to admit. Um, and a lot of that comes from just not seeing that represented. This is an unusual sort of, story about an unusual trauma. But I think the first step in, you know, making victims not feel isolated in their trauma is through depiction so that they feel less alone,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And I think too that it it also should be a message to men that just because something has happened to you, it doesn't you're not less masculine. Um, and I think that's what mentally a lot of them deal with. Of course, the guilt, the shame. I mean, it all comes together. But you've created a film that opens up and should open up conversations or help people to find counseling, find healing from this. Because I think with children, they think they're the only one. They don't
Right.
realize that, it could be 30% of their class has gone through the exact same thing. And I mean, I'm not, it's not funny, um, but most people think that when something happens to them, it has only happened to them. And they don't think about that it's happened to other people. And that's where the isolation comes from. But Dylan, what an incredible film. and and ladies and gentlemen, when you get the opportunity, you need to see Recesses. And this is the latest film from Dylan Trupiano, and it is a film that presents a profound and introspective narrative centered on the Midwestern elementary school secretary who waits with a student after being disciplined for an inappropriate drawing. Now, as their time together unfolds, the story delves into the emotional undercurrents of the childhood trauma and repression, offering a nuanced reflection on the inner lives of children and the lingering impact of unaddressed pain. Recesses is a very powerful and moving film, and one that I hope will inspire, as I just said, conversations and lead both men and women with repressed trauma from their childhoods to come forward and start their healing journey. And Dylan, again, absolute incredible film. Thank you so much for sharing it with me today, and much success to you and Recesses as it moves forward through the rest of the film festival circuit.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this incredible conversation. It's been lovely to talk about the film, and I appreciate, all the questions and way in which you responded to it. So thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I love diving in and breaking films apart to find their truest meaning, and I think we did that with Recesses. And again, ladies and gentlemen, if Recesses comes to a film festival near you, be sure to be in the audience. And when it's over, you have my permission to clap and to applaud. So remember, always applaud the filmmaker, but just like Dylan said, if you have to take a second or two before you give applause, that's okay as well, because
Take your time.
that's
Yeah,
it. At
take your
least you
time.
you soaked in the subject matter and you get the message. But again, ladies and gentlemen, you can catch all of the Bond on Cinema interviews at bondoncinema.com. Check out our Prime show, our YouTube channel, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And you can also listen to us on Spotify, iTunes, Audible, and more. And remember, you're either going to see me at the movies or from the red carpet.